Good morning. It is Resurrection Sunday. He is risen. And God's people usually respond with, He is risen indeed. I want to look at a couple of verses from Matthew chapter 27, starting in verse 61 through 66. And there was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting over against the sepulchre. Now, the next day that followed, the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said while he was yet alive, After 3 days I will rise again. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last error shall be worse than the first. And Pilate said unto them, Ye have a watch, go your way, make it as sure as you can. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. What I see in these verses is that even the religious leaders acknowledge that Jesus was indeed dead. Unfortunately, because of man's unbelief, there have been several theories about what really happened on the day that Christ rose from the dead. Realistically, the resurrection can only be seen as one of 3 things. 1, a great hoax. In other words, the resurrection was false. 2, it can be seen as a myth. In other words, the resurrection is purely fictional. And number 3, it can be seen as the supreme event of all of history. The resurrection is a fact. Yet there are people who fall in line with the hoax and the myth point of views, and they have put forth several theories about what happened on the day of the resurrection. Now, everybody knew, or at least the leaders here acknowledged, that he was dead. They took him down off the cross. They didn't break his legs because he was dead. But some people say that maybe Jesus didn't actually die. He just swooned. He passed out, from the pain or from the loss of blood. One commentator put it this way. He says, a humorous letter to the editor of a Christian magazine accurately evaluated what has come to be known as the swoon theory. Dear Eutychus, our preacher said on Easter that Jesus just swooned on the cross and that the disciples nursed him back to health. What do you think? Sincerely, Bewildered. And the response was, Dear Bewildered, beat your preacher with a cat of 9 tails, with 39 heavy strokes. Nail him to a cross, hang him in the sun for 6 hours, run a spear through his heart, embalm him, put him in an airless tomb for 36 hours and see what happens. Sincerely, Eutychus. I think the swoon theory is ridiculous. It's for those who want to deny the resurrection. Some people say it was just a vision. In other words, the disciples just hallucinated. They wanted to see it. They saw what they wanted to see. Others would say it was a legend. It was along lines of the myth. In other words, the entire resurrection thing was a myth, or it was a story that just had a teaching point. A real Jesus is probable, but not really necessary. In other words, they see the whole thing as simply a myth or a legend. Now, to argue that there was no Jesus is simply stupid. There's plenty of evidence to indicate that there was a man named Jesus walking the streets of Jerusalem. We know that. So this legend myth theory just says, more importantly, that the entire resurrection was just a story that was simply to make a point. And there are people that teach that. In other words, they look at the Bible very allegorically. They don't look at it literally. It's allegorical in nature. It's just designed to teach a point or to give a moral imperative. So there are some people see that. And then some people, there's another theory that the body was just stolen. Maybe the Jews went back and stole it. Maybe the Romans stole it. Maybe the disciples stole it. Or maybe Joseph of Arimathea stole it. Somebody stole it. And then some people say, well, the disciples were so confused and the ladies were so confused that they just went to the wrong tomb. And they went to a tomb that was empty. And they erroneously concluded that Jesus had risen from the dead. Others say that it was a deliberate lie, that the disciples conspired with one another to lie. Well, if that's true, all of them went to their death standing on that lie. Surely they would not have went to their own death on a lie. Surely one of them would have broken ranks and confessed to the sin, but none of them did. But some people think it was just a lie. Others think it was just mistaken identity, that the disciples saw someone that looked like Jesus, but it wasn't really him at all. Now, the final conclusion, or the final theory that we must address, is a literal bodily resurrection. Jesus was raised from the dead, historically and bodily, by the supernatural power of God. That is what we must conclude. The Christian faith depends upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If Christ be not risen from the dead, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, then we are of all men the most to be pitied, if Christ be not risen from the dead. The resurrection is a vital doctrine of the Christian faith. Christianity rises and falls upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. He is risen.